Right, we're ready to go. We're going to start off with our first keynote speaker in this strategic session, number one, which is related to healthcare infrastructure. And our first keynote speaker, who I see sitting there to my left, is Jens. And he's the Director General of the BBMRI ERIC, that's the European Research Institute for Biobanking, and also with the European Life Sciences Research Infrastructures. Please give Jens a warm round of applause.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me, Lise, and the organizing team. I'm really delighted to speak here today. And I will speak about and introduce you to BBMI-ERIC, the European Research Infrastructure for Biobanking and Biomolecular Resources in Health and Life Sciences. But I will also introduce you to the LSRI cluster, which is a life science infrastructure cluster and strategy board, which I'm currently chairing, and we have rotating chairs. And please receive my presentation as an invitation to collaborate with you all and specifically in your project. So let's start. What is the LSRI cluster about? Who are we? We are 14 European life science infrastructures providing access to world-class facilities, experts, biological samples, instruments, services, and data by supporting cutting-edge science by offering access to resources and services to both academia and industry. We're also offering capacity building by offering training, education, consultation, standardization, harmonization, and we are also the largest cluster within currently 28 European Research Infrastructure Consortia, in short ERICs, who work together in the ERIC Forum 2 project. Now, the ERIC Forum 2 project addresses key topics for the ERIC implementation and operations, such as the regulation implementation, ERICs and European science policy and research strategy, internationalization, engagement with third countries, greening, personal-related challenges, and cooperation with ERICs to be. Our strengths of the ERIC model, including the life science infrastructures and also for BBMI-ERIC, are the possibilities for a strong contribution to European research policy priorities across health and life sciences, but also across clusters. And we also allow for pooling of European and member state resources with a pan-European alignment on health, research, and related topics. However, and this is a disclaimer, we feel that there is a need for EU policymakers to encourage new initiatives to cooperate more with existing ERICs and RIs in order to avoid defragmentation of the RI landscape. We also can support and enable collaboration in a range of activities via the ERIC Forum 2 project and beyond, and specifically LSRIs and ERICs have become a strategic asset to structure the European research area. And how that looks like is shown on the next slide, and I hope that you probably won't see all the connections across basically the different RIs here through the different projects, but thanks to the European Commission funding, we all worked together to close gaps and define interfaces to have a very wide portfolio on services for the science community. And this is thanks to the European Commission, while the member states basically have the core budget for each of the LSRIs together. Now, one important aspect is that most of the life science infrastructures compared to other ERICs are very distributed. And what that means, I would like to showcase you on the example of BBMI-ERIC. You can see that BBMI-ERIC, as all the other ERICs, is based on member states. And with 20 members and 5 observers, we also belong to one of the largest life science infrastructures. And what you can see is a distributed form. So the little orange dots are denoting each of our biobanks fitting and belonging to our infrastructure. They are coordinated by a national node depicted by an orange square. And through these national nodes, they are all connected together through BBMI-ERIC with the headquarters located in Graz, as Austria is our hosting country. But it's even more than that on distribution, because it's not only the 400 biobanks with the affiliated partners at the university level and university hospital level, our 24 national nodes plus IAC and WHO, but we have also 3 biotech expert centers, and then around this, dispersed throughout the different countries and member states, are then expert groups for ethical, legal, and societal issues, quality management, and information technology. Now, if we talk about biobanking, there are very distinct biobank types, and this might be also interesting specifically for you. So they're health integrated, population-based, human biomonitoring, environment, plant diversity, domestic and wildlife. And all these biobank types have specific requirements, which you see now on the other side, which are biobank operations and development, ethical, legal, and societal issues, quality management, and information technology infrastructure. And all these requirements are sort of generic for all the different biobank types, and that's why we decided in BBMI ERIC for our next decade, so to say, to support all the different biobank fields in order to foster the One Health paradigm. Now, it's not surprising that in our setup of BBMI ERIC, all these various requirements are basically reflected in the setup of the headquarters. So you can see here our scientific affairs departments, biobank development, IT, quality management, and ELSI, and they're complemented by central services and functions such as public affairs, finance and project management, outreach, education, communications. And also together, all these departments have worked to have basically a very strong educational part. This is either through CME accredited training in our BBMI Academy or in our annual Europe Biobank Week Congress with over 700 attendees across the globe. Now, if we look into a biobank, and I would like to give the example of hospital-integrated biobanking, because I think this is first of all the majority of our biobank types, but it might be also fitting to your endeavors here. And again, this is meant as an invitation for collaboration. We are operating in the sensitive health data domain to advance personalized medicine, and it's all about the patient being in the focus, from prevention, screening, early detection, diagnostics, treatment, therapy prediction, prognosis, and so on. And overarching in the wider infrastructure, we have a focus on cancer, rare and pediatric diseases, COVID-19 infectious diseases, but locally, each biobank collects, of course, any kind of samples and data towards diseases which are of importance for the regional, local, or national research program. In the beginning, the samples have been very much in the focus, and everybody understood biobanking, that's about samples. But we learned quite soon that without the according data, this is of no means. So the data have become much more in the focus in the last years, and this is also shown at the local side of the biobank ecosystem. And this shows this slide, where we have on the one side the clinical side and on the other the translational side. And there's a structural gap in the middle on different levels, health ministry on one side, education, research ministry on the other side, for instance. And this has been closed by hospital-integrated biobanks from patient recruitment and consenting over collection, processing, storage, up to sample data search, request, and transfer. And what has become extremely powerful in the setup has been the biobank information systems, because they enable access to samples, not only, but also clinical and follow-up data, but also research data, and lately also biomolecular resources like any kinds of omics technologies, imaging, bioinformatics, and AI tools. What I'm not saying is that the biobanks need and will provide all these services by themselves, but they collaborate here regionally, nationally, and internationally, and that's where we as infrastructures need to find collaboration in order to use the synergies. But biobanks can link where the services and tools can be found. And this is, I think, an important aspect. And therefore, because of this very powerful biobank information system, we regard nowadays modern biobanks to be actually data integration centers. Now, if you make this accessible also for the clinical side, then this is also supporting the patient empowerment, citizen engagement, clinical trials, and molecular tumor boards. If this is locally working very well, then it's of benefit for the patients, for the clinicians, but also for the research side, and it's a learning and enlarging system. If you do this now quality certified and connected internationally, it becomes a real powerhouse for European science. And this is actually what BBMI ERIC is about. We are connecting all these local resources and bring them into one access pipeline, supported by quality, by ELSI, biobank development, and built on IT infrastructure. So you see here on the top the citizen, patient, or donor providing basically the consent for samples data. The biobank pushes the metadata into our directory or federated platform. If a scientist from academia or industry finds anything interesting, goes through the BBMI negotiator, which is a matchmaking platform with the local biobank. Then we support the agreement, sample, data, or service delivery, and the researcher reports back the results, which in the best interest or in the best case scenario even help this therapy guidance for the patient, but it also enriches the wider ecosystem with further data on the same samples and data. Now, the directory has by now become the largest biobank catalog worldwide, representing these 400 biobanks and about 5 million patients across 32 countries. And the federated platform has been just launched end of last year, but it features by now 450 donors with 200,000 genomes across 10 countries. And this is a much more granular search and analysis tool on an individual sample and patient level. You might wonder what kind of data we have available through this access platform. It's about more than 7,000 distinct OMOP variables with clinical phenotype data, including biochemical measurements, lots of slide imaging data, omics, and national registries are connected or patient-provided data. This entire setup has become extremely powerful and helpful in the European research area landscape, and we are connecting relevant EU initiatives while structuring the European research area. And some examples are here the Cancer Mission and Beating Cancer Plan, for instance, through CanSurf, and I will give a few more insights on that specifically, but also EOS for Cancer and UncanU. We're also part of the pandemic preparedness activities, either through EasyDoor, by COVID, or by providing our BioMI directory to all the biobanks globally being open that can basically provide samples and data for COVID-19. We are also very proud to be part of the European Partnership on Personalized Medicine and see ourselves here as a link to all the other life science infrastructures. And we're also participating in the Rare Disease Partnership, which will start in autumn this year. BBMI is also participating as a member in the EOSC Association and has helped to build it through different projects, for instance, Corwell, EOSC Live, or EOSC Future. And last but not least, we are also part of the European Health Data Space 2 pilot project, where we run 2 work packages on LC and IT aspects. Now, let me go into CanSurf, which is really a co-creation of most all life science infrastructures. And you can see it's 13 infrastructures out of 14, which have selected 150 of these distributed, server sites, and they are basically offering 400 services in 10 research fields. Now, this CanSurf project is about to provide TNA access, transnational access to anyone who is applying for TNA grants, which CanSurf provides. And by now we have received 150 applications from 32 countries, and the data generated there will again feed into EOSC and UncanU. So with CanSurf, we provide really easy access to cutting-edge expertise, tools, and services across Europe because we build one access platform to all the life science infrastructures, independent where the services are, in which infrastructure, or in which country located. I will also touch on the European Molecular Tumor Board at my last slide because I see they are also strong link to specifically your activities. Just highlighting the defragmenting of ERA in this slide, you see on the right side basically the different research fields which CanSurf is capturing overarching with all the partners involved, from disease models, advanced technologies, guidance on therapeutics, screening modalities, bioinformatics, LC training, samples and data, and so on. And you can see with the color code the different fields and the applicants selected from the different providers across research infrastructures, across countries, what they need for their projects. So we can really see through this one platform how we build almost a European virtual core facility from which the user can basically pick independent that they need to care of whom to address for it. And I think this is really very unique and a very strong plea for it. Now, basically my last slide, so you can get ready to move up soon, is European Molecular Tumor Board Network, which basically also involves national and international molecular tumor board networks. We have 3 working groups, and one of them focuses on an outcome registry. So in order to track the outcome of patients for whom molecular tumor board recommendations have been provided. And here we believe that from learning from basically how these patients reacted on the treatment guidance, in the future we can learn from so-called digital twins how they might then respond if they get a certain treatment provided. This EMTBN is open for everyone to basically join, so if you are interested, please register. It's a very lively exchange across the globe by now, actually, and I think it will be quite helpful for the patients and the science community per se. With this one, I'm at the end of my presentation, 15 minutes sharp almost, and happy to take any questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Jens. That is what I like. Really good on-time talks. Excellent start to the 2 days. We might have time for 2 questions, Jens. You never know what happens. Does anyone have a question for Jens in the room? Yes, there is a question at the back. We have 2 microphones, but Elizabeth, do you want to be moving around? There's one here on this side, actually. Over on this side here. Yeah. Maybe if we can assign someone for the rest of the sessions for 1 mic on this side and 1 mic on that side would be great. Because I'm sure, Elizabeth, you maybe want to participate in the sessions as well. Yes, your question.
Thank you very much for excellent talk, Frank Rademakers, Leuven, Belgium. You mentioned data as being crucial for using samples, but under the European health data space, if you want data, you have to go through the national data access bodies. If I have samples in 5 countries, will I need to go through 5 different health data access bodies?
This is a perfect question, and I think that's why BBMI is so interested in supporting the setup of the European health data space, because I think we should make it as easy and possible to access samples and data for the scientists. So I hope that will not be the case, and that what has been already built through different infrastructures dealing with data can still be accessible as such.
Thank you for your question. You know, you finished so ahead of time. We do have time for another question before we move on to the panelists. Does anyone else have a question? Right up the front to make things easy for us. Right up here in the second row on this side, my left-hand side.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that really nice talk. I was just wondering if there's provision for international access to some of this data?
Yeah, so absolutely. So all the tools that BBMI offers, also the access platform for samples, data, services, either through BBMI alone or through the projects together with the LSRIs, basically, is open globally. So that goes globally as well as for academia and industry. Of course, then if it comes to the provision itself, there needs to be looked if the ethics is in place, if data transfer or sample transfer can go internationally borders, so to say. This is your question.
Yes, I guess, so that's sort of data access, but we have to run, what would be really nice is if we're able to, because we're building workflows, say, in different parts, it would be really nice to be able to run those on your platforms. So potentially, using some sort of standards on how we could execute those workflows and make use of that data would be extremely useful.
Yes, and that's why we started to build the federated platform, which is much more powerful than the directory, which is more a catalog. But the federated platform can be also seen more like a sensitive, let's say, computing environment, which is searching but also analyzing, basically. So there can be a connection made there, probably the easiest.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I know you had your hand up a moment ago. Can I ask you for your question during the panel discussion? Yeah, thank you very much. Jens, a round of applause for Jens, please. And I need to keep you on stage, so I'm going to ask you to take a seat here. And then I have to bring up 4 speakers who I will introduce on a first name basis. And I have the clicker as well because I need to use that for this. So first of all is Kyriakos. If we give Kyriakos a round of applause, he's coming to the stage once again. Jeroen from Amsterdam UMC. Claire sitting in the front row from Dassault Systems, and Christopher from University of Amsterdam. Excellent. Everyone's here in good time. I think we're just waiting for one more to make the way to the stage. Here we are. You'll find a microphone on your chairs as well. Very welcome. So, each of you has 5 minutes, and then we'll move through all 4 of you, and then we'll do a panel discussion with everyone. Now, I've placed Jens in this chair because he doesn't need to look at the screen. Can you all see the screen from there?
I can, but it will probably be more efficacious if I stand up and present. If that's okay.
Would you like to do it from there then? You think it's too far? Would you all like to stand up and do so? No. Claire, you're okay to do it from sitting? Kyriakos, you would like to stand and do it from here. No problem. Looking for the timer, people. Can I make sure there's 5 minutes on the screen for everyone as well, please? There we go. Don't start it counting down yet. That's unfair. Kyriakos, you can come towards the stage here. Let's give Kyriakos a round of applause. And I hand over to him for 5 minutes.
Thank you.
The floor is yours.
Timekeeping is of course, of the essence, as we've seen in the Euros, but the topic of today's event is something else. So let's just focus on what we have to share with you at this time in the calendar year of 2024. And it has to be said that this update on infrastructures, certainly on the part of the European Commission, is a little bit early given the overall evolution of the VHT initiative and other actions that are ongoing. So Margareta has already touched on this first infrastructure project of interest. So this is to establish the Federated European Infrastructure for Intensive Care Unit data. This is still in the grant agreement preparation phase, and just a bit of detail. So this project will be looking to identify personalized interventions in real time, and will be working on 6 clinical use cases towards creating the VHT of the ICU patient. You may have seen and heard, of course, our key intervention in this domain. This is the Advanced Virtual Human Twins platform for model integration and validation. On this slide, I would like to share with you the key principles. The platform is advanced because it is distributed, it features AI and synthetic data use, and comes with open source specifications. These open source specifications are the minimum necessary to allow a wide user base to link with, utilize, and develop platform resources when the platform is live. So for this, as an intervention for us, essentially is a policy intervention in the spirit of the digital single market. So we are aiming for as wide use as possible once the platform is live. Security and compliance in that regard are absolutely key. As part of the action, an intellectual property management policy will be elaborated, and the starting operating premise of the platform is with anonymous and synthetic data, yet another feature of its advanced character. In addition, we will be putting in place a SecDevOps process to produce secure software and have the development process of that software being fully secure. Importantly, there is a provision for defining low-level requirements for all components. This is an opportunity for this ecosystem to engineer the advanced platform to its requirements. So in tandem with the minimum open source specifications, this is the focus and aim for as much a wide use of this advanced platform as possible. And of course, there is sustainability provision. In essence, the platform will cater for the outputs and results of all EU-funded projects that take an interest, for example, EDITH, the ICU, as mentioned, and those projects funded under Tools 0503 in the Horizon Europe program. This is the medium to long-term view. We will start with the essential components of the platform and move towards a federated setting of operation with infrastructures and data spaces to link up with in due course. And of course, we will be strengthening these synergies within the same framework with the Cancer Imaging Initiative, the 1+ million genomes infrastructure, and Destination Earth. The policy landscape is such, the one shown on screen, and indeed, it is a medium to longer term process, but we are starting out and we look forward to a further update for the ecosystem and beyond from the autumn onwards. Many thanks.
Thank you very much, Kyriakos, for that very well-timed presentation as well. Everyone's doing great so far today. Our next presenter will be Jeroen. You're happy to present seating?
What does the audience prefer, standing or sitting?
I could dance if you want to as well, of course. It's whatever you prefer. What are you comfortable with?
I will stay seated because I have a very short presentation. And
Perfect.
Standing, sitting, standing.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, the floor is now yours.
So you will see a slide with another picture of me. So happy to be here. I'm Jeroen Belia. I studied medicine and computer science, and that's why I like to have two jobs. I'm appointed as associate professor at the Academical Medical Center in Amsterdam, at the Department of Pathology, as well as being the lead architect in the foundation HealthRI, which is working on an ecosystem infrastructure for secondary use of health data. The relevant projects, you have seen them yet on the slides of the previous speakers, is that I'm a working group lead in the 1 Million Genomes Initiative, and also, like Alphonse already stated, we are working towards implementation, and the Genome Data Infrastructure Project is one of the first European implementation projects. As well as that I'm involved in functional describing the health data access body in the Netherlands. Said so, the foundation HealthRI is funded by the Dutch National Growth Fund plan, in which HealthRI has the responsibility to coordinate and connect the development of at least those three infrastructures listed, BBMRI, Elixir, and EDITH, as we call it, the House of Infrastructures. The development of biomedical and health research in such a way that we jointly are going to help researchers. I was also asked what is the relation to the virtual human twin project. One of them is that we are working towards a data-driven holistic life course approach for not only sick people, but especially prevention, health, as well as medicine. And that's it.
Thank you very much. A round of applause for Jeroen, please. That was very quick. Claire, over to you.
Thank you very much for the invitation, Lisbeth and the entire EDITH consortium. As I speak, I will have a short video just to put images on the words I'm using. It should play without sound. And so that's just to share examples of how Dassault Systèmes is involved in leveraging virtual twins of the human body, but also virtual twin of the drug or the medical device, of the manufacturing facilities that are going to be involved, so that we're going to foster therapeutic innovation and medical practice excellence. So Dassault Systèmes is, as of today, the largest player in the field for healthcare. Some of you know us from our track record of success in other industries, aerospace, automotive, but now healthcare represents more than 20% of our revenue, more than €1 billion last year, just to give you an idea of the size. And what we mainly do today is provide life science companies, so pharma and medtech companies, with ways to accelerate innovation and patient centricity. Two examples that leverage virtual human twins in terms of therapeutic innovation. Well, one that we have developed with Tina Morrison that was mentioned in the opening by our hosts here in Amsterdam. Together with the FDA, we have had a 5-year lasting partnership to do an in silico clinical trial, leveraging the virtual twin of the heart and mitral valve regurgitation as a disease model to showcase that we can test in a virtual cohort of patients a new device before we would go into human. We're going to release the results soon in a publication jointly with FDA, so stay tuned for that. The other one is leveraging synthetic control arms, so that's more on the drug side, but that is really something that's encouraged by FDA and EMA, so the regulatory bodies, especially in rare diseases that don't have a satisfactory standard of care. And so what we will do here is leverage this unique data set that Medidata has, Medidata being our brand involved in the digitalization of clinical trials, to replace the patients that would be involved in the control arm by patients from previous clinical trials that have been using this drug. And so we call that a virtual cohort of patients, but these are actually real data from previous clinical trials. So these are two examples that I wanted to briefly share about how we leverage virtual twins of humans to foster therapeutic innovation. We don't want to stop there. We really want to move into medical practice so that we can help people live healthier lives with sustainable healthcare systems. And so here, the use cases are many, but it can involve training physicians in early training or all lifelong, because medical practice changes quite a lot. It's also about testing different treatment options before you would go into a patient. It's also about therapeutic education for patients. And so we have a few examples. Here again, leveraging the living heart, so our virtual twin of the heart. Dr. Hoggenson, for example, at the Boston Children's Hospital is currently using our virtual twin as a way to do surgical planning before he would go into children with heart malformations, but we want to open this to many more use cases, and so we have launched a project that is called MediTwin with 7 medical institutes in France and INRIA, our computer science research institute, with the idea that we're going to develop 7 different types of virtual twins to help with treatment or diagnosis in 3 different therapeutic areas: oncology, cardiology, and neurology. Obviously, we are very much willing to work with a broader ecosystem, hence the fact that we're very much engaged with EDITH. We have been discussing use cases quite extensively in the context of the tender that was published by the European Commission. And so we really look forward to this conference as a way to learn more from you. Actually, 2 challenges that we have identified are, first, the access to standardized data. The fact that there are no clear standards is very difficult if you want to gather data from different sources. And so that's one challenge. The second is you really want to be into the workflow of a physician if you want to be used, and the business model has to be figured out. Reimbursement, regulatory access, so software as a medical device. So these are really the questions that we want to address with MediTwin as a way to learn. And to close that short introduction, I just wanted to name, we're opening a very exciting 2-day conference, but if you want to know more, you're kindly invited to another conference later in the fall. We will have Lisbeth as a keynote speaker. It's going to be our 10th International Virtual Human Twin Experience Symposium in Paris at Pasteur Institute. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Claire. And indeed, you can pass the clicker on to Christopher for the final panelist talk.
So I'm going to be presenting just a fraction of the work that's going on at the University of Amsterdam. I'm going to be focusing on my contribution to the AMDEX project, which is really relevant. I didn't hear about EDITH until last week, but I see a lot of overlap here. So the Amsterdam Data Exchange, or AMDEX for short, is an ongoing project that has been funded in several blocks. It represents a collaboration between public and private participants. And it involves an academic research component, but also an industrial development. It is an effort to try and develop tools and standards for building data exchange systems that cross organizational boundaries, which have a lot of inherent challenges. So I put on the screen some links for you that might be interesting. And if you have interest in participating in the project or learning more, you can contact one of the people in my group, which is Sandra Klaus, who could not be here today, unfortunately. You'll also hear more about AMDEX tomorrow. To give you an idea of the sort of use cases we have in mind, we imagine some federated machine learning data processing pipeline. On the one hand, we want hospitals to process data, but at the same time, we want to ensure that the policies that are specified by the hospital, perhaps just in time, are preserved at the same time. And this is a particular use case relevant to the research data exchange. use case, which continues to be relevant, even though we've been developing it for several years. So University of Amsterdam is a very big organization, as Alphonse knows. I'm familiar with just a small part of it, particularly the Informatics Institute, and particularly just my research group and my environment. To give you an idea of the fraction of the story that I'm most familiar with, it has to do with the specification of usually distributed systems and controlling their behavior via their specifications. So at the technical level, we're talking about software languages, the development of agreements that usually mirror agreements outside of the technical world, so laws, regulations, organizational regulations. And then we develop systems that enforce these specifications, or we try and reason about them and prove properties. But there's also a lot of other activities going on in the group. I could talk about this all day, but instead I'm just going to give you a very small idea. So say we now have an instance of the Just Act framework, which is a paper that we published recently, just one small contribution. What it allows you to do is that you have two agents, Amy and Bob. On the one hand, Amy is trying to process Stan's data, which is subject to some agreement. And at the same time, Bob is amending the agreement. Now, what makes this all very useful and magical is that this can happen concurrently. And both Amy and Bob can use automated reasoning based on some kind of logical inference rules to reason that what they are doing is permitted. And they can be very clear about this. So the relevance of this kind of work, the project and my research domain, is that it has this big idea that I see reflected today, that inter-organizational collaboration really requires the precisely agreed and controlled data sharing, which is not very easy in general. And the way that we approach it, that makes it practical, is that we have an emphasis on precise, flexible, and transparent agreements. In my view, this has to do with the formalization of these policies. The reliable and semi-automated enforcement of these agreements, and under all, this idea that there's a fundamental sovereignty of the participants in the control over their data. Amdex has already done some work and found some success in integrating commercial, medical participants, public works, and there's a variety of partners in the same systems. But we're here today because we're particularly interested in looking forward. If you find that this resonates with you, or if you think this is an interesting idea, please get in contact with us. I suggest you reach out to Sandra Klaus. Thank you.
Thank you, Christopher, and you did exactly what I wanted you to do, which is to click to the next slide and put the clicker down. Thank you very much. Right, we have loads of time for questions because everyone has been on time in the panel with their talks. So I'm going to start with one question, and then I'm going to move to the audience. So if you have a question, please keep it in mind. We have 2 microphones in the room to be able to share them and to get the questions from you. And to start with our panel, you've already heard we have a panel from various diverse backgrounds who are focusing on different components, different elements of a problem, and also have overlap in terms of research infrastructure. So if I was to ask you, which is something you talked about, Christopher, and yours, about working together in collaboration, how can we increase collaboration interaction between research infrastructure? So I'm going to go to you first, Christopher, because you linked to this at the end of yours. So in your opinion, from your experience at your stage of your career, how could this be done?
So I think is it working? Okay. So I think in general it's very difficult to do this, and it's because these systems, when they're representing a collaboration, really require that we satisfy like the intersection of everybody's constraints on what happens. And the way that we make this tractable and possible is that we really try and do it systematically. And how it happens today is that people sit around a table and they really try and draft agreements, and it goes back and forth, and it can be a very labor-intensive, difficult process. And so, in short, my answer would be semi-automation. We're trying to make this process at least systematic and ideally as automated as possible. So that is developing tools offline to help you look for inconsistencies in your requirements, or monitoring online to see if somebody is breaking the agreement perhaps without even realizing it.
Okay, thank you very much, Christopher. So what I'm actually going to do is use your answer and come straight to our keynote speaker and ask Jens to reflect on what Christopher has just said in relation to this, and then I will get reaction from the middle 3 as well, of course. But Jens, what do you think about what Christopher has just said?
I think I would agree what you were saying, and I think I see so many dedication and motivation from all of us in science to work together, but it's always so difficult to catch up afterwards after certain initiatives have been launched. And I think in-kind contribution is nice, but it's sometimes not sufficient to make exactly the steps that you just described. So there's a big plea to the European Commission to basically help us aligning these different initiatives, maybe even before they're getting started, to see what's out there, to bring together the key basically drivers, and to foster this even through alignment calls potentially, because I think the management budget or the administration to make this happening is so short with everyone, with the resources, that that's almost not possible. So I think, and running behind it is more difficult than planning it from the beginning. And I think European Commission has shouted that it is possible, but I think the fragmentation that we see with so many initiatives, it's really difficult for the individual scientists or initiatives to keep up with it. So this is the biggest challenge, I think.
Kyriakos, would you like to react now? There is a microphone on your chair as well, so it might be good for you to use that. There's no problem.
Okay, thank you. So just the first reflection, I think mainly drawing on Christopher's comments, the central aspect here is trust. We start from, let us say, take two organizations or two infrastructures wanting to share data. I thought Chris explained really well how that process of trust unfolds, essentially by following best practice in design, implementation, management, and of course, compliance when it comes to sharing data and indeed other resources. If we look at, for example, private industry, and we do have a national champion right here with us, when we look at IPR and its management is absolutely central, not just for industry, but for our research base and other innovators. So essentially, trust is absolutely key. It is certainly one key theme that we often foster through EU actions and projects.
Thank you very much, Kyriakos. Claire, it's the natural bridge. He mentioned private industry now at this point. So what's your reaction or contribution in relation to this?
Yeah, thank you. And you mentioned us as a national champion. You mean European? Actually, Dassault Systèmes has been a European society for quite some time. Yeah. And for us, it's like Europe. Europe is the only size at which we can play. I think like each given country alone in Europe doesn't weigh enough. So the only way for us to really weigh is to come as a federated Europe. So it's that. I mean, that's what Dassault Systèmes has been willing to show as becoming a European society. Two comments to echo what I've heard. Actually, we think that to foster collaboration, you really need a platform. That platform is going to ensure that you are going to give trust. Trust is going to come from the visibility you're going to have from everyone's work, and will also be the way to have actually data liquidity, like you're going to have a data flow across that platform. One example taken from another industry, in aerospace 40 years ago, you would hire mathematicians that are very good at space geometry because they would have to look at the 2D map of an aircraft, project the 3D model in their mind, do their engineering, each in their specialty, and at the end, all the drawings would be put together and a physical mock-up of the aircraft would be built. No collaboration possible because each mathematician would be in their swim lane, not being able to understand what the others are doing. So what we mean by collaboration is really this way of having a shared representation of what people are trying to achieve so that they can actually collaborate. And now one question for my fellow panelists. Do we really need a platform dedicated to research, or could we also embark, medical practice together as a way to have more use cases, but also better interactions between stakeholders? That's actually a question that I'm debating quite a lot with our French Health Data Hub, that's really focused on research. And I think they miss a lot by not focusing on performance of the hospital setting and even moving into reimbursement discussions. So if I can open the floor with that question,
of course,
I would love to hear from my fellow panelists.
Of course, but I would like to get Jeroen's reaction to the initial question, and then we'll address your question then, Claire. So Jeroen, you have a very interesting background in academia and a very interesting combination. What do you feel in your experience over the years in relation to collaboration and infrastructure?
I guess it's a multifaceted question. Because collaboration is on different levels. infrastructure itself. We already heard the data. Standardization, because we need semantic unification, because that's the working group I led. It's difficult. Even asking an open question without prejudicing somebody is difficult, I know I have learned. And then you go to the process and the workflow. There was already a question, can we integrate workflows? But if the workflow doesn't fit in the process of a clinician, he or she is not going to use it. Because changing processes is very, very difficult, or habits, let's call them. And then we are just touching the organizational level and the law. And what we noticed, that trust was already mentioned, let's say the financial or the budget. And then, how do you call it? Open-mindedness, equal playing field, not being the boss, trying to do those kind of things. So it's a multifaceted problem. It's not easy.
That's an interesting answer at the end, to simply say that it's not easy. Before I come to the audience for a question, Claire, you asked a very open question to the rest of the panelists. I think it would be very nice to address that question. Could you maybe repeat the question for the panelists so they know exactly in a concise manner what that question is?
So should it be a platform, a collaboration only between research, like across research, or should we also include medical practice, industry stakeholders, so that you broaden actually use cases?
We try to call it, an innovative laboratories, where you can start working together pre-competitive.
Yep.
So an open space. And then you can do either in kind or have budget available. And then you have intrinsically motivated people, because that's one of the first starting points. If you're not intrinsically motivated, you cannot support it, then you might be pulling a dead horse.
Christopher, what do you think? You're at a different stage in the academic journey. How do you see this question from Claire? It's a very good point.
I'm sorry, can you repeat it one more time?
Should we talk only about a research infrastructure, which means that it's only about research, or should it be coupled with use cases that would come more from the medical practice or even industry challenges?
I think if you abstract the problem a little bit, there's definitely a lot of commonality outside of research. So it would be a tremendous waste to try and specialize in this fragment. I'm sure there's some effort in bridging that gap, but at least in the project I'm aware of, this is definitely in our mind. You know, we don't want to make any crazy assumptions about the nature of these systems. For example, you don't want to assume that metadata is publicly visible, because that basically cuts out the medical use case, right? So this is definitely something that I think is important. Otherwise, we'll end up reinventing the wheel in each domain.
Thank you for the input on the academic side, and I can assure you that the stage is set up very organically here. It wasn't staged in the sense that we have the academics on one side, and then we've industry in the middle, and then the other side of the coin then. Jens and Kyriakos, you've heard, there we go, there's the fist bumping of the academics on one side. Let's get the reflection then on the other side from Jens.
Yeah, I have to make it. Yeah, works right. I have to make a disclaimer. I'm actually not a data specialist or a scientist. I'm a medical doctor specialized in human genetics. And I think what is very often forgotten is actually the source. And the source is at the patient, at the clinic site. And of course, we need to take them on board. That is for sure. Also because it starts there with the quality of the data that we all are working with. And then what we're also doing in BBMI-ERIC, we open it, of course, up with industry, with the wider public. That is a must, I think, to build trust as well, as we heard several times, but also to make the most use of it. So I think co-creation across all the levels, who everyone is involved, is really a must.
And Kyriakos, would you like to reflect on this?
Thank you. Thanks. So indeed, a very valid observation. So from the point of view of policy, certainly the one of the Commission, Margareta explained it very, very well. So the last mile, in essence, is a key focus for the VHT initiative and indeed other initiatives that the institution runs. Also, we probably have to come back to the terms used, for example, in Horizon Europe. So in that program, we often have actions titled Research and Innovation. And this is exactly, it goes to the heart of the point made by Claire. Clinicians for solutions in this domain have to be involved very early on, as early as possible, because that contribution, that participation warrants and is a guarantee and is a very good foundation for co-creation and uptake further down the stages of development of a particular solution.
Thank you very much. Claire, does that help you with your question?
Yes, thanks a lot. And I would add what the comment that you made, Jeroen, about the workflows. Like, if doctors don't feel like they understand where we're going, then if we don't change their workflows, then you can innovate great things, but it's not going to be heavily adopted, or it's going to be a north face. So involving physicians over the course of the research is going to be critical.
Yeah, and co-creation, because in my opinion, the academics, sorry if I offend you now, are working on professorware, even if we are not professors yet. But we need to take it to the professional level. And that's another last mile, right? Which is often forgotten. And we need either industry, or even if you talk to AI and have the medical device regulation where you need to do post-marketing, as an academic, I cannot do it. So we need each other.
Yes, it's a symbiotic relationship indeed. The audience, I'm going to move over to this side. Do you have a question, audience? We do. We have a question from this side of the room, first of all. And when you ask, just before you ask a question, you can just say your first name so everyone knows you then on the panel and in the audience.
Okay, so thank you, everybody. My name is Mario. Nice to meet you, and thank you so much for this beautiful presentation. Actually, I have two very quick questions. The first one is on the infrastructure. So on one side, we have the data federation, which makes a lot of sense for the privacy regulatory part. But on the other side, we have the fact that for computing, it makes much more sense to be concentrated. And this is also shown by the fact that most advanced have been now in companies that concentrate both hardware and human talent. So a quick comment on this clash, that would be very interesting for me. And the second one would be on the regulatory perspective, more from the people from the industry and research. With all these legislative acts like the GDPR, the AI Act, the Medical Device Act, how do you feel? You feel that is this helping? Is it hampering? And how does what happens with your competitiveness to countries like China that don't have this? Thank you, and sorry for hijacking the mic for two questions.
No, thank you for the questions. We appreciate it. Who would like to address the first question on the clash? Is that the one you would like to address, Jeroen?
Whether it's a clash, it depends on how you define federation. Because if you bring data to one central place, but it's still under control of the data holder, then you can bring it to compute. And I guess you need a hybrid system. Sometimes you can do it federation. So certain questions can be answered in a federated way, and some need to be, let's say, at a central place. So it's how you define federation is also the trust. So and also economically of scales. So for example, I work in the genomics field and an imaging field. I have an imaging background. The amounts of data, we are not going to just send you the data because it's going by train might be faster, right? So it's again what you define.
Jens.
Yeah, I would fully agree, but there's also two sides of the coin, right? I mean, this federation of federations, also what infrastructure is working on, also major initiatives like European Health Data Space, EOSC, and so on, for regulation issues, but also for, just exchange speed and so on. But in certain instances, they are also centrally hosted data repositories if basically the access allows it, and that makes it then easier. So I think infrastructures does not mean necessarily only federation of federation, but there are also examples for centrally hosted repositories.
Claire, I think you want to contribute as well.
Yeah, maybe one additional comment on top of what's been shared already. If you want to go into federated learning, you need high quality standards, because even if it's like federated learning brings you a way to learn on different data sets where they sit, but if these data sets don't share the same standards, then you're not going to be able to make any meaningful computation. On regulatory, I want to echo what Kyriakos said. For me, these regulations are challenging, and our customers are actually, like, for example, when we speak about the medical device regulation, it's seen as a constraint. At the same time, we see this as a way to establish trust, and health data are so critical. We think that Europe has taken really a good approach, starting with GDPR and then building on this with the additional sets of regulations, because if these health data are well handled, then that creates the conditions for trust that will allow for sharing this data. And so if we come there, I would like to add one more thing to the list, which is the belief that we have at Dassault Systèmes that this data should be hosted on the sovereign cloud, Why so? Because these data have so much value that we, as Europe, should really protect them from any extraterritorial law. And so the way to do this is to actually host the data on a sovereign cloud, which we ensure that they cannot leave Europe, and at the same time, they will meet the highest standards in terms of cybersecurity.
Thank you very much, Claire. Do either of you want to react on the regulatory components? Yes, Christopher.
I intended to continue reacting to the previous question.
You want to also react on the first
Yes.
question? Pardon me. Yes, of course you can. On the clash.
I think it's really an interesting, like, fundamental tension, which is, I think, what you mean by clash. And I think it's really a nice demonstration of why these systems need to be specializable and programmable, because indeed there is some fundamental tension between, say, we want to do all of the compute where it is most effective, but sometimes that's not allowed or permissible. Say, for example, this would leak private data, right? So I think this is really an excellent demonstration for why it's crucial that at some level these tools let us reason about this design tension and strike a compromise, which is why I also think it's not very reasonable to try and design one system, kick it off and get it running and call it done. There will always be specialization for the use case required. There will always be monitoring and reasoning required because of this tension will pull in one direction or the other.
Thank you very much, Christopher. Kyriakos, you haven't reacted to these questions, but I see you nodding a little bit.
Yes, I would just say that the elements for a response to this question really come from, in part from Claire's response and also from Jeroen. We have very well established recent infrastructure examples where that clash is effectively nearly resolved, where data stay where they are, with the data controllers, and the learning assets, meaning learning with a wider sense. So the AI algorithms, or indeed the models used in driving our learning, travel. And so that interaction happens often in secure processing environments on the side of the data controller. Now, if we want to examine modalities, the different types of data involved, imaging, and so on and so forth, there will be niche cases where we may need to work out the system in a different way. But essentially, we observe moving forward in Europe in a very, very robust and compliant way.
Thank you very much for your answer. Thank you for the questions, plural, much appreciated. We'll offer the audience another opportunity for a question. We have one, we have two, we have three. So I'm going to let two people down, unfortunately, so I'm going to come to the front row first, and then I'll come to one of you then after that, if that's okay.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Adriana de Souza, representing one of the 3 European Innovation Council-funded projects of digital twins. My question has been derived, based on the presentation of Claire, but it's addressed to everyone. When we, the very last, sentence was, we expect for approval in order, to initiate, clinical trial. Approval means regulatory approval. And the issue is that infrastructure is not just hardware and material and, samples. The infrastructure is the whole environment around us with foundations and regulations and legislations. And when we have, to propose for a new technology to be funded, we have to start from TRL, technology readiness level, and building readiness level. Is it the prime time to start thinking of the regulatory readiness level in order, to pave the way to a clinical uptake of all these fascinating digital technologies? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Who is that initially addressed to? And then I can put it to other members of the panel. Who would you like to answer that question first?
Well, I would like Claire to start, who's more clinically oriented than the rest of them.
Thank you very much.
I can start. Thanks a lot for the question. We called out Tina Morrison earlier at FDA. I'm going to quote her boss, Jeff Shoren, the head of CDRH, so the Center for Radiological Devices and Radiological Health, so the body in FDA that is going to grant approval for medical devices. He gave a foundational keynote in 2018, sharing a dream, which is to move from 1 year of looking at regulatory dossier for devices to 2 weeks or even days. So that's the order of magnitude of shortening the time frame, and he's betting on that thanks to virtual twins of humans, computational modeling and simulation. Why so? Because if you can really provide more evidence thanks to virtual twins of humans, then that should accelerate the track towards regulatory approval. So that's one way to answer your question, which is to say, yes, there are some executives in regulatory agencies that are really pushing towards acceleration of that timeline.
Thank you very much. Maybe, does anyone else, maybe 2 more reactions to that before I move on to another question? Jeroen.
So maybe I can turn it around, because if you look at a process from start to end, closed loop principle, the first question would be, which thresholds do you like to stay and not remove, but lower? Because some thresholds should not be removed. Either they should be checked manually by a person or by systems or semi-automatically. And if you are able to identify those thresholds and then lower them so that we can either high jump them or take them quicker, then I guess we are at let's say, a regulatory readiness level, if I'm correct.
You probably have to think of it reducing on the way. Otherwise, the technology is there and the building, but the regulatory will never reach the patients. So we need to be very practical toward that, and the Commission should take care of that.
Kyriakos, I'll get a reaction from you on that.
Professor Odysseus, thank you. Just to mention that as part of this initiative, when it comes to the European Commission as the funder, we have been looking, and we have by now included best practice in that regard, so how to prepare our researchers for their regulatory compliance journey. For example, the projects funded under the Horizon Europe Core 0503 tools very specifically have been asked to produce evidence and health economics, so analysis, so not just get them onto the journey of regulatory approval and compliance by asking them to generate evidence in clinical settings, but also do health economics analysis that ultimately helps towards reimbursement of the final solution. And this is still within Horizon Europe. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the question. Just with an eye on time, I will come back to you in a moment because I'm just looking at the clock. I do have one question I would like to ask on behalf of the organization, and that is, it's kind of a blank page question. So if you can answer very quickly, then I will take one final question from the audience. If we could start it from the start, imagine, you've heard these questions before, of course, right? But I'm going to make it very hard for you to answer it because I'm going to ask you for the answer in a very short period of time. If you had a blank sheet of paper, would you go for many different RIs or just go for one that encompasses them all? So say which one you'd go for and why, very quickly. Kyriakos.
Is it just the answer without justification or answer plus justification?
I would like some sort of a justification, okay, for sure, well, yes. Yeah, okay. This is not a yes or no or
yeah,
left or right.
My answer would be multiple.
Yep.
And the reason why is this. We might think that we have a way of tracking disease incidence and prevalence in Europe and somehow forecasting research needs to address that incidence and prevalence. And in addition, some might say, well, that the technology, the enabling infrastructures are already there. Very simply said, the COVID-19 pandemic have showed very clearly how needs can change within weeks. And so simply anticipating the demand within this binary choice, one or many or several, it just isn't tenable, in my view.
Thank you. Jens, is it one or many and why?
I would also go for many. Not too many, but I think what has been built up so far has been a success by the European Commission and the member states, simply for the fact that different needs reach out engagement of different communities in different domains is something you need to have specialists engaged. They need to identify themselves with it. And with one large, that is very difficult to do. So I think there is a need for multiple different setups of infrastructures But at some stage, it should not grow further, because then it becomes overarching, complicated in rather fragments and defragments. So I think there is a certain time scale when it might just change.
And you have to figure out what that time scale is and what is the criteria for what is the limit and where does it change and so on. I can imagine that will move with how the times are changing. Claire, from your perspective, one or many and why?
I would say that I would ask the question a different way, so that I would look for openness and the collaborative aspect of the infrastructure rather than deciding if it should be one versus many. So at the end of the day, if you have the collaborative foundation that we have been talking about earlier in this panel, then it can be several.
Okay. Jeroen.
I cannot choose, and that's why I try to always get the question behind the question, right? So if you look at, let's say, Europe, we are Europe, right? So that's one organization. But if you go to specialists or domain expertise, you need them concentrated. So those might be separate topics. So it might be that, Claire already stated, if you want to do federated analysis, you need the same data model, the same infrastructure. So why design 40 tracks instead of having one track with this, let's say, the same train? You know, the personal health train concept in the Netherlands. So it depends on what you're looking at. So for certain things you need multiple organizations, but for some you don't. So again, what are we discussing, right? Yeah. So the infrastructure, the hard iron, the software, preferably one, or best of practice, best of breed, yep. And then choose one.
Okay, and Christopher.
Since I'm forced to give an explicit answer, I will say many, but now I will poke holes in my answer. I feel like this is the sort of question that if you do enough reductive boiling down, the distinction kind of disappears. So maybe let's ask, what are the threats of going one way or the other? If you go for one system, the threat is that you are not flexible enough to handle unexpected change. If you go too federated or whatever, it becomes too much overhead, too complicated. So maybe my way of striking a nice compromise would say, okay, let's embrace at some fundamental level. We will always need to change. We'll always need to revise whatever we've got. Whether you look at it as one messy system or a bunch of little systems that communicate, I don't think is very important. But it is important that we address this like lock-in threat by having some kind of standards, by working from best principles, as has been said like 4 or 5 times now. And also just always revising what we've got, always addressing problems as they come up.
Thank you very much, Christopher. Thank you all for answering the question. I'm looking at the clock. We have time for one more question, which I will promise to this man here who had his hand up. Could you get the microphone, if there is a microphone there, to this man here? Yes. And this will be the final question of this session.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. To federated learning or federated data analysis, which has been mentioned several times. So basically coming from the experience of 2 projects in which we are involved as Fraunhofer, so that's the organization where I'm coming from, and where we are responsible for developing actually federated machine learning algorithms. And in all of these projects, of course, now the situation is so that having a federated learning system doesn't prevent that you need joint controller agreements, for example, and ethical boards agreements also to actually get access to the data in reality. So, which actually brings me back to the point and the question that I wanted to ask to Christopher. So you mentioned in your talk a very interesting technical solution that potentially could negotiate in a semi-automated manner while doing inferencing between different parties or the interests of different parties. So in how far do you see from your point of view so that this could speed up these oftentimes very lengthy processes of such legal agreements? So we are talking here in reality often about timeframes up to 1.5 to 2 years in reality. Yeah? And how far do you see from your perspective here also a buy-in from lawyers, which of course at the end of the day you need, yes? Because at the end of the day lawyers have to sign such legal agreements. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. So I'm not a lawyer, but I do work with lawyers, and it is one of the first things I learned is that their process for drafting laws is remarkably familiar to me in that it is a bit like programming. They have best practices, there's quite a lot of templating, it's quite regular what they're doing. And we see that there is already a field of legal engineering popping up where they apply kind of software development practices to the construction and modification and reasoning about laws. So they produce artifacts that to me look a heck of a lot like programs. And so I really see that as time goes on, these efforts are really flowing together. And this really, for me, creates the opportunity for semi-automation. As soon as you have something in a form that can be reasoned about systematically, whether you call it inference or whatever the case may be, or some kind of semantics, as long as it is systematic, it can be automated. And as long as you automate it, you lower the bar for effort of creating new things and reasoning about them. So I see great potential, and we've already seen some of it in practice. And there's a bit of a horizon, you know, there's still quite some effort for translating a legal text written in English or Dutch or whatever into a form that can be reasoned about systematically like this. But this barrier is getting thinner and thinner and narrower and narrower.
Thank you very much for the question. Thank you very much for the answer, Christopher. We have time maybe for one other person to reflect on it, that same question. Kyriakos, final statement from the panelists then?
Yes. So in addition to what Christopher just elucidated, there's one key consideration in that legal compliance isn't about the usual suspect, the GDPR, for example. It is also about intellectual property of your participants in your platform, and it is about other legal considerations that each and every platform will have to meet. So I just find that this emphasis on data protection, on the one hand, it has to be there, but there are other aspects that merit attention too. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kyriakos. Thank you for the question. Let's give our panelists a round of applause.